I have made no shame of the fact that I absolutely adore everything about Indiana Jones as a character, and I have loved this character since I was a wee little lad of around 4 or 5 years old. And to still be getting content in this universe with this IP is such a huge joy for me. Um, being able to watch all these amazing films over the years, follow up with the TV series, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and everything in between. Um, I just love everything about this character. I'm really excited to be playing the new upcoming Indiana Jones of the Great Circle. So, IGN, I guess, has put together this video called The History of Indiana Jones Games. And someone was asking today during the stream, what was the last game that I played? And I was like, well, I think last December I went and played Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, but I have very fond memories of the Emperor's Tomb as well. But it's been a while since I've played an Indiana Jones game. I did not play the Lego games, so it's been a hot minute since there's been a new release, and I am really excited about the upcoming game. But I wanted to also watch this video with everybody and do a reaction to it. So this is around 30 minutes long. It's called The History of Indiana Jones Games from IGN.
If you go by last year's finalists for Best Independent Game at the Game Awards, there are indie games and there are indie games. That is, there are independent games financed and made by individuals or teams free from the influence of a major publisher, and there are independent games that are actually owned by billion-dollar South Korean corporations. But if you're not interested in the debate around what can be named an indie game and what can't, there is a third type of indie game, and they are named after a dog.
You are named after the dog?
Got a lot of fond memories of that dog.
After well over 10 years since his last dedicated digital adventure, Indiana Jones is returning
been
to
a while.
video games in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is arriving imminently on PC, Xbox, and Game Pass. But how did we get here? Well, Indiana Jones games may have otherwise dried up over the past decade and change, but before
It has been
that,
a hot minute.
the good Dr. Jones's video game history dates back over 40 years.
Fate of Atlantis! Fate of Atlantis!
So, kick back as we dust off some antique hardware and whip through the history of Indiana Jones games. Can I do the music? No?
Greatest Adventures.
Who's
I
the
remember this one.
worst?
Oh, it's so good to be back with Indiana Jones. Dun, 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 dun.
First created by George Lucas back in the early 70s, Indiana Jones, originally conceived as Indiana Smith, was heavily inspired by the adventure serials of Lucas's youth. And the character's trademark look took a heavy dose of inspiration from the likes of Alan Ladd in the 1943 film China, Humphrey Bogart in 1948's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and Charlton Heston in Secret of the Incas from 1954.
Wow, I haven't
After
seen
a
that one.
surname shift, Indiana Jones was brought to life by Harrison Ford on the big screen in one of the most magnificent action-adventure movies ever made, 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, it's an
As
awesome
you
movie.
almost certainly already know, Raiders of the Lost Ark was followed by two absolutely outstanding films and two other films.
Other films.
Now you're getting nasty.
What you may not know, however,
I
is
like
where
them, but
Indiana
they
Jones
are
made
other.
his very first appearance on the small screen. The answer is Raiders of the Lost Ark for the Atari 2600.
That's crazy.
It was created by legendary Atari game designer Howard Scott Warshaw, the man behind Yar's Revenge, the best-selling first-party game ever on the console. Raiders of the Lost Ark hit the Atari 2600 in late 1982, around a year and a half after the film had arrived. I only played my dad's 2600 later in the 80s, and about all I remember is instantly bouncing off anything more obtuse than Outlaw, which is a game with a premise that begins and ends at shoot the cowboy on the other side of the TV. Despite my unequivocal
sound
love
effects.
for all things indie, Raiders of the Lost Ark for the Atari was not my type of thing. Looking at it through a modern lens, however, it is certainly a fascinatingly complex and ambitious Atari 2600 game, even if it is confusing and more than a little unfair. Come on, Snake's the same colour as the ground? Despite being a strictly single-player experience, it required the use of both the console's joystick controllers to operate. The right joystick moves Indy around the limited assortment of screens, and the left stick allows players to navigate their inventory and select the object you want Indy to use.
That's
Of
ridiculously.
course, utilizing both controllers came with the
No,
benefit
thank
of
you.
doubling the amount of buttons players had at their disposal. Twice the buttons!
It's just the two.
Oh, yeah, Indy is correct. Atari 2600 controllers only have one button, so yep, it was just the two. However, don't assume Raiders of the Lost Ark is simple on account of having such a limited spectrum of controls. Rather, it's anything but. With the benefit of hindsight and the fact that the effective route through this game has long since been charted, Raiders of the Lost Ark's arcane gameplay seems almost quaint in 2024. But
I don't know about
how
that.
exactly
That looks still
contemporaneous
really
audiences
complex.
were meant to blunder their way upon these ambiguous but awfully specific puzzle solutions is a total mystery. Interestingly, Raiders of the Lost Ark holds the Guinness World Record as the first ever video game based on an official movie license.
Wow.
It would seem it just pipped Alien from Fox Video Games, which also came out in November 1982.
That's
although
such a Pac-Man
that was
ripoff.
literally just a Pac-Man clone. Well, that and that other Alien movie tie-in for the Atari 2600 from December 1982, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Coincidentally, E.T. was actually also designed by Howard Scott Warshaw, at the request of Steven Spielberg himself, no less, though he only had 5 weeks to make it. Of course, that's a story for a different documentary.
Look at this. It's worthless. $10 from a vendor in the street. But I take it, I bury it in the sand.
That's a
for
nice
1,000
plug.
years, it becomes
That's pretty
priceless.
awesome.
Indy's next video game would be his first original one, Indiana Jones in the Lost Kingdom, which was released by Mindscape for the Commodore 64 in late 1984. It features a pretty nifty arrangement of John Williams' unforgettable theme music, but very little else worth celebrating, depending on how much mileage you reckon you'd get out of a constipated cowboy turning birds into butterflies with an apparently enchanted walking stick. The game's box boasted that nobody told Indiana Jones the rules, and no one will tell you. It wasn't quite true. There was actually a clue hotline for stumped players to call and be told how to proceed, but either way, it feels like
Oh, man, I
Mindscape
forgot
was
about
putting
tip
a lot of
hotlines.
stock in the cognitive powers
Like
of
they
the
were like
youth of the 80s here.
900
I was
numbers
there,
or something?
and I can't exactly vouch for it, but maybe that was just the palookas I hung around
It
with
was like
back
per
then.
minute or something.
They have not one brain among them.
Indy's next official movie tie-in came with August 1985's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom arcade game, which arrived a little over a year after the movie. Also developed by Atari, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom was instantly a huge step up over its Atari 2600 predecessor, and not simply because Indiana Jones no longer looked like a tiny UFO floating over a fire hydrant.
Soon, Kali Ma will rule the world.
The Temple of Doom arcade game was a very early example of digitized speech in video games, something that had only just started in Atari's 1983 Star Wars arcade game.
Use the Force, Luke.
With his iconic whip, players were required to hustle their way through Mola Ram's lair, freeing captured children, avoiding spike traps, and defeating cultists and creatures. A minecart level obviously made an appearance too.
I remember a minecart level. This is not the one I'm remembering.
Versions
though,
of
from when
Temple
I
of
was
Doom
younger.
eventually made their way to home devices like the Commodore 64
We had
and the NES.
a friend of
but
ours, his
as was
dad,
generally the case during the
had
golden age of arcades, the home
one where it
versions
was like
looked and played like
first person,
vastly inferior
I
knockoffs
think,
of
or
the
maybe
real
it's
thing.
over the shoulder, but it was
Fake.
a
In
minecart ride.
1987, Mindscape returned with yet another original Indiana Jones game that flaunted the series' naming conventions by switching the and the for a much clumsier in. Indiana Jones in Revenge of the Ancients. It was a text adventure, so
Yeah,
Mindscape
no,
wasn't
thank
just
you.
going back in time for Indy's story matter, it was going back in time for its game design
Yeah, no
too.
thank you.
Want to hear about it? Not at all.
Well, good, because that brings us to quite a busy little period for Indiana Jones games, kicking off around the 1989 release of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is, frankly, the most perfect movie ever made.
Yeah, it's the best of the
no,
series.
I won't be taking any questions.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade actually inspired 3 separate games released between 1989 and the early 90s. One of those was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the action game, first published on PCs in 1989 by Lucasfilm Games, which was later renamed LucasArts, then later still Lucasfilm Games again. Versions of the game eventually made their way to approximately every other platform on Earth in the early 90s. Unfortunately, no version of the game was very good, and considering Indiana Jones is supposed to be a teenager in this scene, their understanding of the movie they were based on tended to be rudimentary at best.
it's just a video game. Suspension of disbelief is required occasionally.
Insulting them, and you're embarrassing me.
Well, be that as it may, it's hard to get too misty-eyed about the action game when it was so thoroughly outclassed by its own stablemate, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure.
I kind of
While
remember this one a
Lucasfilm
little
Games had outsourced the development of the action game to a long-defunct studio called Tiertex, the graphic adventure was developed by Lucasfilm Games itself, and was the 3rd game to run on the studio's now famous Scum
Engine,
after
baby.
Maniac Mansion and Zack McCracken and the Alien
Mindbenders.
Mindbenders. Point-and-click adventure games have always been Lucasfilm Games' bread and butter, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure, remains
I remember
a
this one,
fine example
sure.
of its work. Led by adventure game legend Ron Gilbert of Monkey Island fame, the graphic adventure sticks far more closely to the events of the film, though it still finds room to colour outside the lines of the script with sequences that allow Indy to talk his way around Nazi encounters if you're canny enough. Or you can just punch Hitler right in his goddamn face. There are definitely some quality of life issues present in The Last Crusade that later Lucasfilm point-and-click games would go on to iron out, but there's no denying the tremendous attention to detail the team managed to squeeze into it.
Yeah, this is a good game.
I have to do is squeeze.
The 3rd game based on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was an NES-exclusive action game from Taito, which was distinct
played
from
this one.
the action game, but did mean there were literally 2 Last Crusade tie-ins available on NES, published out of opposite sides of the planet. For reference, you can recognise the Taito one via Indy's martial arts skills, as it appears Harrison Ford has been replaced with Jean-Claude Van Damme. But hey, I guess I love Kickboxer and Bloodsport as much as the next guy.
Then what are you complaining about?
Well, nothing, I guess. Although, the topic of recasting Harrison Ford does bring us neatly to 1993's The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles by Chris Gray Enterprises
I don't remember this one
Incorporated,
either.
and 1994's Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones from the less enterprising but equally incorporated Brian A. Rice Incorporated. The former was an NES exclusive, and the latter was only available on Sega Genesis, which went by
Explains
the
why I
slightly
never played
cooler
this one either.
Sega Mega Drive in Japan and Europe,
Sega Mega Drive.
the accidental Sega Mega Drive in Australasia,
Mega Drive from Sega.
and the very different Super Aladdin Boy in South Korea. No, that's not made up.
There's a picture of it right here.
That's it.
Aladdin Boy!
Anyway, in keeping with the TV show that aired between 92 and 93, Harrison Ford was
It's a
in
good
fact
show.
replaced with Sean Patrick Flannery, at least for the box art. The platforming action in each, however, was not particularly fun or memorable enough for either of them to be much more than a footnote in Indiana Jones's gaming history. Certainly not fun or memorable enough to ignore the magnificent game we just skipped, 1992's legendary
Which
Indiana
we just
Jones
replayed.
and the Fate
This is a
of
phenomenal,
Atlantis.
phenomenal point-and-click game.
All right, Jones, how you gonna find that statue and all this junk?
Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis finds Indy in a race against time to beat the Nazis to the lost underwater city of Atlantis. Directed by Hal Barwood, the game had initially been intended to be based on a sidelined Indiana Jones script written by Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire director Chris Columbus prior to The Last Crusade.
What are you waiting for? Let's open it.
However, Barwood, who himself had earlier co-written Steven Spielberg's first theatrical film, The Sugarland Express, petitioned to create an original story for it. Barwood collaborated with The Last Crusade co-designer Noah Falstein, who introduced the concept of having 3 different routes through the game's story. The Wits path, which focuses on a more cerebral challenge.
What do you want, pal?
The Fists path, which is a more action-oriented Hollywood experience with lighter puzzles. And the Team path, where Indy remains with his partner Sophia Hapgood to solve puzzles together.
Dr. Indiana Jones, I believe, and Madame Sophia Hapgood.
I never tried the
These
action
paths
path.
would branch away after the first act, though they would converge again towards the end.
Yow!
Representing LucasArts at around the peak of its point-and-click power, The Fate of Atlantis is not only regarded as one of the studio's best ever adventure games, it's one of the best adventure games of all time.
It's damn
that
good.
That said, it's hard to say whether it would have been the same smash hit with the name the suits reportedly wanted to give it, which was simply Indy's Next Adventure.
Yeah.
Hey, what happened? You don't look very happy.
Fools. Bureaucratic
What'd
fools.
they say?
They don't know what they've got there.
As with The Last Crusade, LucasArts simultaneously published an entirely redundant second version of The Fate of Atlantis, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, the action game, which was developed by Attention to Detail slightly before it briefly hit the big time with the futuristic roll cage racing series. With its isometric view and its finicky and frankly awful controls, Fate of Atlantis, the action game, was actually a far poorer action game than the platformers that had preceded it. A CD version of the graphic adventure arrived in 1993 with full voice acting, but unfortunately a planned follow-up called Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix was cancelled.
Maybe the Atlanteans didn't like tourists.
Although that game's story was still actually published.
Really?
Where? Well, nobody knows where or when.
Yeah, we do. It was published in a limited Dark Horse comic series from December 1994 to March 1995. Keep up, Indy. Anyway, while Indiana Jones's graphic adventures were wrapping up on PC, Super NES owners were in for one final taste of Indiana Jones's greatest adventures in Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures.
I remember this one.
Released in late 1994 in North America and mid-1995 in Japan and PAL territories, Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures is a Super Star Wars style side-scroller that encompasses the events of all 3 original films. Developed by Factor 5, which would go on to develop a string of Star Wars games with LucasArts, including the Rogue Squadron series, Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures features a horde of familiar locations from the movies, some seriously impressive Mode 7 sequences to break up the platforming action, and well-balanced combat split between Indy's whip, pistol, and grenades. Sure, it was harder than a woodpecker's lips, and sure, it took a few detours to accommodate
This fight, I do remember
genre-typical
this
boss
fight.
battles, particularly since Indiana Jones villains in the films have a habit of literally killing themselves, but Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures is a much-loved segment of the Indiana Jones gaming tapestry.
Tapestries? Dear me, the man is dense. This is a castle, isn't it? There are tapestries.
This is a castle. And we have many tapestries. And if you are a Scottish lord, then...
I am Mickey Mouse. How dare he?
The punch
Less
sound
beloved
effect.
was the
Gotta love it.
peculiar 1996 PC game Indiana Jones and His Desktop Adventures, which
Don't
was
remember
led
this
by
one.
Fate of Atlantis creator Hal Barwood, but was an entirely different sort of adventure game. With its budget price and retro RPG aesthetic, even for the mid-90s, Desktop Adventures was officially designed for a more casual audience to idly play in windowed mode while they were doing other tasks.
Yeah,
and its
menial tasks at
procedurally
work.
generated approach promised literally billions of possible games, as per an enthusiastic claim on the game's box art. One mission even had Indy retrieving the head of C-3PO, a cute Easter egg that was later re-referenced in 2008's LEGO Indiana Jones The Original Adventures.
Well,
Yeah, I did not play the Lego games because I was busy traveling when these came out.
Unfortunately, this casual take on indie-themed adventuring was not exactly welcomed by critics.
Quick commercial break, everyone, to celebrate and give thanks to all of these amazing people who keep me on the air full time. Really appreciate the support. All you got to do is join as a member. You get access to private videos. You can also do super thanks on any upload or super chats and stickers on any live stream or premiere you see. And beyond that, don't forget we're multi-streaming over on Twitch now, so you can support over there as well. Thanks so much to everybody. Let's get back to the video at hand.
This is not my idea of a swell time.
Thanks in no small part to LucasArts' existing reputation as the home of genre-leading adventure games, Desktop Adventures' lo-fi and frictionless approach was met with an inauspicious reaction. It also probably didn't help that 1996 also saw the debut of Tomb Raider, a 3D adventure more cutting-edge than Lara Croft's Tank Top. Though she was certainly inspired by Indiana Jones, Lara rapidly rose to become a certified cultural icon herself. Indiana Jones now had some archaeological competition, and she was more than happy to muscle Indiana out of the equation. Indeed, 1999's Tomb Raider The Last Revelation even had an Easter egg of Indiana Jones' skeleton, complete with a fedora and a whip.
Those people are trying to kill him. I know, Dad! New experience for me. Happens to me all the time.
Indiana Jones finally entered the third dimension himself in 1999's Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine for PC, which, coincidentally enough, is about an ancient Babylonian device that facilitates interdimensional travel.
Where are the priceless artifacts? The gilded idols? The crowns of kings?
I remember this one too.
Again directed by Hal Barwood, The Infernal Machine is a third-person action adventure heavily informed by Core's early Tomb Raider games. Run, jump, pull blocks, push blocks. Lara may have begun life as an Indy imitator, but now Indy was looking at Lara and copying her every move.
Look what I found.
Puzzles weren't particularly taxing, though performing them sometimes was, with the somewhat cumbersome controls.
That thing looks whippable.
Set in 1947, the Infernal Machine benched the series' normal Nazi baddies in favour of Soviets instead, who are intent on harnessing the power of the titular Infernal Machine and its interdimensional properties for an edge in the quickly escalating Cold War. It did, however, bring back Sophia Hapgood from the fate of Atlantis, which was a neat touch.
Hello, Indy. Been a while.
The Infernal Machine was initially set to receive a PlayStation port, but it was cancelled. An N64 version did make it into the wild in 2000, albeit exclusively in the US, and it was only available to purchase via the LucasArts company store or purchase and rent from Blockbuster. You know, the stores that used to let you borrow games for a small fee. Before that
long ago,
concept was sacrificed in order to let people stream Is It Cake directly to their phones.
This is a cake.
What?
The N64 version was supposed to make its way to PAL territories, but after numerous delays, that was eventually cancelled. There was also a top-down handheld version of Infernal Machine released in 2001, although it unfortunately arrived on the Game Boy Color just as the Game Boy Advance was arriving to replace the Game Boy Color.
That belongs in a museum. So do you.
Indy's next adventure came in
this one I remember having a lot of fun
courtesy
on.
of The Collective, a team fresh off 2002's Xbox exclusive Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Hello.
Taking place in 1935, Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb was actually a prequel to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
It's a good game.
Arriving first on the original Xbox, then PC, then several months later on PS2, The Emperor's Tomb remained relatively Tomb Raider adjacent, but it dialed back the brain teasers and block puzzles in favour of lever hunting and light platforming. The Emperor's Tomb was also considerably more combat oriented, with a brawling system borrowed directly from Buffy and the ability to use items lying around the world as weapons, including chairs and broken table legs. The Emperor's Tomb had all the core ingredients of a robust indie adventure, including magnificent music, nefarious Nazis, and a typically powerful ancient artifact the Nazis want. In this case, the Heart of the Dragon, a perfect black pearl legend says can control the hearts of men. However, it also packed a few surprises, including an appearance by an enormous dragon and a showdown with a huge kraken. And here I was thinking the only kraken involved in Indy was the sound his whip made. Although, I guess he also certainly doesn't mind cracking onto the ladies as well. LucasArts began work on a follow-up to The Emperor's Tomb in 2004, destined for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, both of which were set to arrive in late 2005 and late 2006, respectively. Fans were treated to a first glimpse of the game in a quirky, tech-focused teaser trailer which LucasArts used to illustrate some of the advancements it was promising under the hood. It was actually a first look at the animation middleware Euphoria, the biomechanical AI that would go on to hit the big time in 2008's Grand Theft Auto 4. Sadly, work on the much-anticipated project faltered, and the game missed its planned 2007 release. To make matters worse for LucasArts, Naughty Dog had also decided to join them in the archaeological arena, with November 2007's Uncharted Drake's Fortune for PlayStation 3, the first outing for the now iconic PlayStation hero Nathan Drake.
A friend of yours?
A competitor. He was good. He was very, very good.
Work on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 Indiana Jones project continued for a time, and in the interim, LEGO Indiana Jones The Original Adventures from Traveller's Tales arrived in June 2008, just after the arrival of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in cinemas. A whimsical and family-friendly tour of the first 3 films in the series, LEGO Indiana Jones didn't stray far from the successful formula Traveller's Tales established with its brick-busting LEGO Star Wars games.
Hey, why, you know,
but it didn't really have
broke,
to,
don't fix
as
it.
evident from the dozen or so licensed LEGO games that have followed over the last decade and a half.
They're fun and they sell a lot of
With a great sense of
copies.
imagination and a huge list of playable characters, LEGO Indiana Jones was certainly the most fun way to re-experience the original films in a virtual environment since Indiana Jones's Greatest Adventures for the Super NES back in 1994. Traveller's Tales released a quick-fire sequel in 2009 dubbed LEGO Indiana Jones 2 The Adventure Continues, which included new levels for the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull but slightly poorer versions of the original trilogy. But back over at LucasArts, how were things going with its belated but bold new biomechanically driven baby?
Our situation has not improved.
Unfortunately, in early 2009, it was confirmed that LucasArts had permanently iced its Xbox 360 and PS3 Indiana Jones project, and the reportedly largely unfinished game would never see the light of day. LucasArts allowed its third-party partners to continue working on the PS2, PSP, DS, and Wii version of the project, published in mid-2009 as Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. But the reception for an indie adventure on such superseded hardware was understandably tepid. What did the Staff of Kings get from IGN?
5. You know it, and I know it.
Yeah. Released right in the heart of the motion control fad, the Staff of Kings was hamstrung by its drastic overuse of waggle. Even the Wii exclusive co-op mode that paired Indy up with his dad was diabolically
I never
unfun.
played it. Sounds
in
like
fact,
it's
the
a good thing I
general
didn't.
consensus was that the best thing about the Staff of Kings on Wii was that it came with Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis embedded in it as a bonus. Well, that and the absolutely dead-on Sean Connery impersonation from Scottish actor Lewis MacLeod.
Junior, we're in the middle of South America.
But was this just an isolated misstep in the Indiana Jones gaming saga? One bad date before we return to the banquet?
Bad news coming.
Yeah, not really. Indiana Jones's next appearance was Indiana Jones Adventure World, a long-defunct Zynga game that was released in 2011 and shut down in 2012. It was on Facebook, presumably wedged somewhere between all the Minion memes and misinformation.
Don't look right! Keep your eyes shut!
Indiana Jones also made an appearance in Fortnite back in 2022 as one of its hundreds and hundreds of skins designed purely to keep epic plush and parents poor. Indy was back in the games business after 10 long years. It just wasn't in a fun one.
No fun! Play with you, no fun!
Fortunately for fans of Indy's traditional single-player adventures, Indiana Jones is finally about to return in a proper game of his own, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, a first-person action-adventure set between Raiders and the Last Crusade.
Oh, it's
We
looking
have
awesome.
top men working on it right
Top
now.
men.
Who?
Top
The
men.
answer is Machine Games, the studio behind the modern Wolfenstein series. And frankly, I can't think of a more perfect place for the world's most prestigious Nazi-punching professor to end up than the current home of one Mr. B.J. Blazkowicz.
Nazis. I hate these guys.
Hell, they've clearly got the Harrison Ford finger waggle down pat, so they've already convinced me. For more deep dives into the histories of long-running licensed video game franchises, check out IGN's look back at the terrifying and sometimes terrible history of Alien games, and our radical history of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games.
I might
For
have to do
everything
the
else,
Alien game
head for the
one.
fireplace. Wait, no, I mean, for everything else, stick with IGN.
I may have to do the Alien one just to get myself up to speed, because I don't know that I've actually played all of the Alien games. Anyway, folks, that's a wrap on that little thing. I've only played probably, I feel like maybe half of those, if not a little bit less. And the ones that stood out to me are Fate of Atlantis and The Emperor's Tomb. Those are really good games. And I personally can't wait for The Great Circle dropping here in another day. This is going to air tomorrow the 5th, which means on the 6th, yeah, tomorrow we'll be playing it bright and early, 6, 7 a.m., maybe a little bit earlier on YouTube and Twitch, as soon as I get up, essentially. My alarm's for 4. I got to do some chores, do some other stuff, but as soon as I'm up and available, we'll be starting pretty early that morning and moving onwards, playing throughout the weekend with early access. Hopefully we'll see you there. Till next time, everybody, stay safe. Happy gaming.